Hi, everyone. This is our appraisal project. We are Group 4. I am Maggie Beasley.
I'm Sophia Balfado.
I'm Garrett Clark.
Austin Cox.
Emily.
And I'm Malik Williams. Our subject property is a ranch style home that was built in 2006, located at 241 Stone Pond Way in Seneca, South Carolina. It includes 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, an attached garage, and a screen porch, which makes it a good home for a traditional family. The home was built on a lot which is 0.83 acres in size, is 3,000 square feet, and has a current selling price of $339,000. Now here are some pictures of our subject home.
So, like he said, our property is in Seneca, and that being quite local, it's just a small town located 20 minutes from Clemson and the university itself, and it's about just over a 15-minute drive to downtown Greenville, located right around Lake Hartwell and Lake Kiwi. It's only grown about 5% since 2010, with a population of about 8,500 people. With that being said, there's a lot of 65 years or older residents, with that statistic being about 26.5% of the population. Further, we found another statistic that was interesting, that 53.7% of the citizens are female. In addition, the mean income of the area is about $41,000 per household. And in addition to that, the median value of owner-occupied housing is approximately $858,000.
For the comparable properties, we used a selection criteria of each comparable property having 4 bedrooms and 3 baths, which is the same as the subject property. And each house is a single family home. Now, each comparable property has a similar feature in that none of them have pools and they all have attached garages and all fall within the price range of $300,000 to $400,000. All our subject properties or comparable properties have been sold within a 2-month period from November 2020 to January 2021. And all of our comparable properties were located on less than 1 acre. Each of our comparable properties was built after the 2000s, ranging from 2006 to 2019, and is located around in the Seneca High School School District. As you can see here, our comparable chart represents the statistics that I just listed, and in our next slides, we will have pictures and explain each comparable property.
For our first comparable, it was sold at $398,000. It was built in 2015. It has 4 beds and 3 baths, just like our subject property. It's around 2,300 square feet and sits on 0.43 acres of lot. For our second comparable, it was sold at $315,000, again within that range. It was built in 2018. It has 4 beds and 3 baths as well, and it's just under 2,200 square feet on 0.31 acres. Our third comparable was built a little earlier on in 2008. It was sold at $329,000, has also 4 beds and 3 baths. It is 4,740 square feet, a little larger than the other comparables, and it sits on 30.32 acres.
Our fourth comparable property sold for $308,000, and it was built in 2005. It also has 4 beds and 3 baths and is around 2,700 square feet and sits on 0.89 acres, one of the bigger lots of the comparable properties. For comparable 5, this sold around $376,000, and it is the newest comparable, being built in 2019. It also features 4 beds and 3 baths and has 25,000 square feet and sits on 0.25 acres of land. And then our sixth and final comparison sold for $314,000, was built in 2018, features also 4 beds and 3 baths, has around 2,600 square feet, and sits on 0.24 acres of land. And that concludes our 6 comparable properties.
So there are three major ways to value a home through an appraisal. And our first approach that the first approach we're going to touch on is sales comparison approach. And as Garrett described, as well as Maggie and Sophia, you can see that our comparables are very similar to our subject property, which is why we chose them in kind of helping our sales comparison approach. So we adjusted our properties based on some different factors, including the number of beds and baths, adjusting for square footage, as well as the year built and lot size in terms of acreage.
So this is the beginning of the sales comparison approach grid, which gives us an outline for everything that we adjusted our comparable homes for to match the price or to find the price of our subject house. So in the next slide, we can see the specific adjustments that we calculated. The first one that we thought about doing was beds and bath, but that wasn't necessary because all of our comp homes both had the same amount of beds and baths, which was great. The next was our adjustment for square footage, which we calculated by adjusting for square footage by multiplying the average price per square foot by the difference in total square footage between our subject house and the comparable houses being adjusted. We found our average price per square foot simply by either looking on Zillow if they had the number listed, or calculating that by taking the square footage and dividing it by the price of the house that it was sold for, because these are the comp houses that have already been sold. After we did that, we could adjust them up or down whether or not they had more or less square footage than our subject house. Our next adjustment was the year it was built in. To find the adjustment for this, we looked on census.gov and found a statistic that for homes built since 2006, they have an average appreciation of $5,000 per year. After knowing that statistics, we can multiply that $5,000 number by the difference in the total years from our subject house to the comp homes. For example, in the first example, the first comp home, it was built in 2015, and since our subject house was built in 26, that's a 9-year difference, and multiplied by the $5,000 that it's been appreciating, we can calculate that there's a $45,000 difference in that comparable home and the subject house based purely off of the year it was built in. This is why it's in parentheses, because it's newer and we are trying to adjust it down to the subject house, which is older, and that's how that adjustment is made. Next, lot size in acres was calculated, and we used the Oconee County online property records, which shows a history listing of all of the properties and land that was sold. So I calculated that each acre was worth about $40,000 because that was the average price of an acre being sold in empty lots, and the Stone Pond neighborhood, which is where our subject house was, and some of our comparable homes. We adjusted this by finding the acreage number that each house was worth and multiplying it by $40,000 per acre. And that's how much we could conclude the comparable homes were different than our subject house. After adjusting for the lot size and acreage, we had all of our major adjustments, and we could have a final adjusted sale price for each of our comparable homes. And then after taking an average of that, we could conclude with our final adjusted sales price for the subject house to be $336,000.
So just to kind of go full circle, and after Austin explained where those numbers came from for our different adjustments, whether it was unfavorable or not to our subject property, that is why we added or subtracted it for our comparable. So just for comparable one, it having a smaller square footage size, we had to increase it by $80,000 to be more comparable to our subject property. And for year built, since it was newer, we had to adjust it down to our subject property, since our subject property was built in 2006, so a good bit older. And then we'd adjust for the lot size, meaning that our subject property had greater acreage than our, for example, our property number one, this second column. So we had to add that, as he just kind of just touched on.
So to move on to the second approach we used, this was the cost approach. And starting with the cost approach, we had to find the estimated replication cost. We used the website costtobuild.net. On the next slide, this shows all of the different adjustments being made and all of the different inputs that we had to do in order to calculate the overall cost, including materials and labor. And this came out to be $330,000. And so then after that, back on the next slide, we had to subtract out the estimated accrued depreciation to get the depreciated cost of the building. And Elise will go into this calculation in a moment. But then after finding the depreciated cost of the building, you then have to add back in the estimated value of the land. And we found this on a website, as Elise is going to show on the next slide. We found this to be $19,000 from a public record in Oconee County. And just to specify, a lot of this information was harder to find just because we haven't been on site or in the property. And so this is why this number might be a little off in terms of the initial replication cost. But after finding all of these values, we found the given value from the cost approach to be $331,000. And now Elise will go into valuing the depreciation.
Yeah, so as Maggie just touched on, showing where we got our estimated value for the cost approach, it's important to touch on where we got our estimated accrued depreciation. So we used our estimated replication cost, and a useful life of 90 years to find our estimated accrued depreciation, which is used from the formula effective age divided by useful life, all of that multiplied by replication costs. So in this second chart on our slides, our effective age being 5 years, useful life 90 years, and a replication cost of $330,187, which she just touched on. You divide those and multiply it by the replication cost, gives us a total estimated accrued depreciation of $18,343, which she had in her formula above to subtract out the replication cost to get the depreciation cost of the building.
We then went on to the income approach, and we started with direct capitalization. And again, as Maggie kind of touched on, a lot of these figures were derived from outside sources, as Seneca doesn't have much available information to the public regarding to real estate. So to start, we have the potential gross income, and we find that by taking the monthly rent that we found on Zillow and multiplying that by 12 to get $16,656. And then we subtract the vacancy and collection costs from the PGI. In that case, we take the PGI and multiply it by the vacancy rate, which we found to be 13.25%. We then would add any miscellaneous income, but in this case, we didn't have any. So that gave us our effective gross income of $14,449. We then subtracted operating expenses, which we found the average operating expense per month would be $140.80, multiplied that by 12 to get $1,689. We then would minus any capital expenditures, which in this case, we did not have those as well. Therefore, our net operating income would be $12,759.48 to conclude the net operating income, which we will use in the DCF calculation as well. Then to find the price estimate, we take that net operating income, divide that by the cap rate, which we found to be 7.38%, to find the estimate of $172,892.
Another component of the income approach is the discounted cash flow. So as you can see below, we used the holding period of 10 years and found our net operating income for those years to be $12,759. As you can see below in the chart, we used that number for each cash flow. And we found our discount rate through bankrate.com to be 3.28%. We used this percentage in the cash flow equation. We added it to 1 and raised it to the n, and we divided each cash flow by this equation to find the PV of each cash flow and added them all up to find our estimated value of $239,301.66. So as you can see in the reconciliation table, we used a weight for each approach. So as you can see, we used the highest weightage to the sales comparison approach because we felt this approach primarily and best fit a single family home. So we used a 75%. And at the bottom, you can see that adding the direct capitalization and DCF components, that 2.5 plus 2.5, we had a total 5% weight for the income approach. The reason this had such a small weight is because the income approach primarily applies to venues that produce revenues such as condos and apartments. So we gave it a very small percentage. And after multiplying each weight by the indicated values that we found in the previous slides and adding the weighted values up, we got a final reconciliation value of $328,887. We viewed this as a strength of our appraisal because it came with almost in $10,000 of the selling price of our subject property value now of $339,000.
As for our COVID analysis, with COVID-19 plaguing the entire country since the beginning of 2020, it has left the country in a recession along with many Americans struggling. It has also led to unemployment rates increasing, the stock market becoming more volatile, and also result in more legislations being passed to assist struggling Americans. In regards to real estate, with the fear of spending increase due to the uncertainties of COVID, the Federal Reserve decreased interest rates to 0.25% in 2020, which has also resulted in the rate of 30-year fixed mortgages and other mortgages dropping. In the case of a 30-year fixed mortgage, it dropped from 3.51% to a rate of 2.73% in 2020. And with these decreased mortgage rates, it has led to the increase in demand for houses by a rate of 33% in 2020. And with the increased demand, it has resulted in prices rising by almost 9%, which in result led to the collective value of home equity among homeowners rising by $1 trillion in the past year. And also the average number of days it takes to sell a home decreasing to 16 days compared to 28 days in the previous year. It should also be noted that the demand and rates that have been resulted from COVID can change due to factors entering the economy, such as a new vaccine, as well as how long it takes for the vaccine to become mainstream and available to everyone throughout the country.
So
Thank you so much. That concludes our presentation from Group 4.